Okay, so the knight. It's the only one left. Here we go. What is going to be the workflow here? We're going to use most of the tools that we've used up until now. We are going to block out the shape of the knight using primitives. And there's some options here, what you think might work, but we just want to get the rough shape of the horse head here using primitives. And the important part here is to sort of get the volume and general shape where you need. Then we are going to uh, save that. So at each stage, I would probably duplicate and then perform the conversion on the duplicated shape so that if you need to, you can go back to the previous one. And the other thing I'll be doing along the way here is using the save incremental in Blender to make sure that you've got another breadcrumb trail to go back and look at if you need to, if you make a mistake here. But we're going to block out the shape using primitives. I'm going to use a very low poly cylinder to sort of get started. Then we'll go into the sculpting workflow and use that by first. The first thing here is going to be remeshing it. And there's a couple options there. There's the dynamic remeshing, and then there's the explicit remeshing. And I'll show you here what to look out for. And then we want to be adding the detail that we need for the sculpt. And so we'll be essentially dramatically increasing the amount of topology there so that the sculpt brushes are able to use the kind of detail, able to create the kind of detail that we want in this piece. Once that's done, it'll be a very, very, very high poly version. And so what you're ending up there is sort of the high poly detail mesh. Then we will go back and retopo the high poly and end up with a low poly that has really good quad flow. And the thing that we won't do this week that we'll do next week is then we will bake all of this high poly detail onto the low poly mesh using Substance Painter. And so at the end of this week's process, we'll have this, essentially this really good looking version that you've sculpted, and this, and we'll stop there so that we can check that before we go any further. And then the next week we'll bake one onto the other. So if the baking thing, if you haven't done that before, just don't worry about that for now. Essentially, this is the same process that we went through with the bishop, except that instead of sculpting the high poly, we just sort of use that Boolean and screw modifier version as our template and then retopolized it. Now this week, instead of the Boolean version, we're going to be taking the high poly sculpted version. Okay, so first thing, blocking out the mesh. And I've got this, and then let's go ahead and delete that. I am to scale, and so let's make a super low poly cylinder as a starting point here. I'm going to make it 6-sided. So let's come in here and say, or no, 6 on each side. So let's say 12. That should be good. And that's good. And then I will tab in and scale it down. There we go. And let's G, move this up. And let's go SZ. There we go. Remember, I'm in edit mode here. So G down, R, A, R, that. There we go. G. And if anything, I'm making it too big because then I can adjust this later on. Maybe, remember if we go into wireframe here, we can select through this and maybe do a little bit of just really rough movement here. Okay. I'm not worried about topology too much here. We can take all of this A, and then if I shift D in edit mode, I get a second copy of it. And so I can sort of R and get this to where, and so all of our usual rules about overlapping here are off the table. We can just sort of, this is all going to get mushed together by the remesh process. And so over here, let's bring this down. All right, this part here, actually knowing that needs to be a thin thing, so the main, I'm going to leave the main out of it and add that during the sculpting process. So let's put that in there, smooth that up. Okay, let's get another separate cylinder. If I come back and look at it in the side view there, if I shift A, I'm adding, remember all of this is in this one mesh here. I'm going to put this as night blockout. There we go. And then zoom in a little bit here. Shift A adds the next cylinder to the same process. And again, let's put it at 12. And here I'll make this much smaller. How about 0.2? Just have less scaling. Then go. Is it in some strange place? No, it should be here. There it is. Yep. And let's rotate that. And let's see what that looks like. Okay, getting the right idea. Maybe use a sphere. And here. Again, trying to, knowing that I'm going to sculpt this, just trying to get these block out points relatively okay. Right, the main will come out in that process. Up here, having less of these just make for less smoothing later on. And that works. Let's look at this from this angle. If I need some more topology, I could just add a quick Control R here and maybe scale that out. And then maybe grab this one here, just the front one, turn off this. Just get this front one. Turn this off. There we go. Now I can click on this front one, hopefully. There we go. Now go back, look at it from here. And E, 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 S. It's a little bit easier. Again, knowing when to grab some of these. Okay, let's look at that in 3D for the blockout. Yeah, so if I want to default in any direction here, I want to default in it being too big, too fat, because then I can just whittle it down during the sculpting process there. Good, so this is night blockout. Let's examine it again here. Looks okay. All right, great. And so let's save incremental. Let's save. Let's tab back out and say, oops, don't do that. Let's save and come over here. And then I'm going to copy paste this and then turn this off. So I have a trail there. And then this is going to become night remesh. There we go. And here, if we start to look at this, let's see how we can enter the sculpting workflow with this. So the keys here are that every shape I used, I didn't delete any faces. So everyone is closed. If you have an open hole, it won't run the remesh as smoothly. And so let's look at this from the front. We can go into the sculpting workflow by just going over here to sculpting and zoom in. There we go. Okay, and so we can't, it'll let us, if we select the night remesh here, you could click and start moving things, but this is not what we want to do. We need to redo this here. In fact, I think we may want to smooth it out a little bit first. And so I think I'll tab in, or actually select this object. Let's go back to layout here and over here and back out of this. Shade smooth this. Okay, now back over to sculpting. There we go. And so now, yeah, sculpting on this mesh is not great because we need to have essentially a dense topology for the brushes to work well. The brushes will work here, right? Because they're still just tools for moving points, edges, and faces around, but we want a more dense topology remesh here, which is why I named this night remesh. And so there's two keys here that do this. Control R, actually I get this, just R, no, Control R. In sculpt mode, we've got this selected. Coming up, that's there. Got this selected. Oh, because I didn't select it. Object mode, click on it. Is there a big tab into edit? Are these here? Okay, those are not good. Alt click that. Delete those. Okay, I just had those there. You don't want those there. Okay, so now come back. I'm in object mode. Now I come into sculpt mode with that selected. Now if I press R, there we go. I get the grid. And so what is this showing me? This is essentially is going to voxelize this, kind of Minecraft it into tiny, tiny, tiny voxels. Voxels are cubic pixels. And so it's kind of like the scale command here. And so this, if we go too small, you're going to really slow down the process, especially depending on how fast your computer is. And so let's go about here. And then when we need to have more detail later, we can go back down. And so something like this, if I click, that sets it. I haven't actually done the retopology. If I look at the here, now if I watch what happens when I press Control R, boom, there. You see it retopologize this by dividing it according to that mesh size into these very close, highly dense faces. If it gives you something saying it was non-manifold, it means that there's a hole in it somewhere, and it won't run the remesh algorithm on something that's non-manifold, meaning that there's a hole in it somewhere, which is why I used the close primitives the whole way through the process of blocking it out, because I knew the cylinder didn't have a hole in it. I knew the sphere didn't have a hole in it. And then I made sure they overlapped so that there weren't any holes. Like you can have these kind of gaps or something, but none of the continuous meshes has a hole in it. And so if that's the case, if it's giving you that non-manifold, you need to go back and probably redo the block out to make sure you're using things that are smooth. Okay, so now let's do a few things here. We do want this to be symmetrical. And over here, this is the symmetrical control. And we need to say, in this case, why we're not seeing the grid over here, over here. There's the floor axes. There we go. All right, so now I can see a little bit better what I'm doing. And so ours, when we sculpt, essentially everything we sculpt over here, we want to go over here, like the mirror modifier. And ours needs to be symmetrical on the Y. And let's just test that once. If I were to look at this from the top down, and I start doing something over here, there you see both sides. That's happening on both sides. You see it. Control Z that. So if you have yours facing in the X direction, you need to be symmetrical on the Y. If you have yours facing in the Y direction, you would need to be symmetrical on the X. Good. Okay, that's good. And so now let's look at some of the controls here. There's a lot of different sculpting brushes, and you don't need to use them all. You barely need to use any of them, really. I like to come in here and turn up the size of these so I can just more easily see them. They got these fun icons now. And our big ones here, we have our draw brush, and the biggest things here are going to be F allows you to change the size of the brush, right, the radius of the brush, and Control F allows you to change the strength of the brush. And you can see those numbers, or you can come up here and adjust them however you want. If you don't want to get used to the shortcuts right now. And then the basic workflow here is that clicking will perform the brush. And so, for instance, if we look at this from over here, if I were to come in and start doing something like that, clicking draws this out, whereas control clicking pushes it in, does the opposite there in terms of this workflow. But it's not as simple as, click makes it go out, control click makes it go in, because some of the brushes themselves are inverted, right? And so controls really just invert the brush. Some of the brushes by default push in, some of the brushes by default pull out. And holding down control when you're using the brush actually changes that. And yeah, so here, for instance, I didn't really get this mouth shape quite right. And so if I bring this down a bunch here, and let's control here, start to bring some of this in. In fact, I'm going to turn up the strength and the size of this a bit. And in any brush, if you hold down Shift, it shifts to smoothing. Okay, so there's a specific smooth brush. It's one of these red ones. Yeah, here. But I don't find myself going over there to that a lot, because no matter which brush you're in, just holding down Shift does some smoothing. And so here at the outset in my blockout, I'm probably just using a lot of that to sort of smooth out what I did with my blockout. Maybe the brush is a bit bigger, but beware, the radius of the brush really does affect how the smooth in particular functions. And so there's a lot of work there. And be careful using the smooth brush when you get towards the edge of the object. And remember, this is happening on both sides, since we are in, we have the symmetry turned on. And so this can do a lot to sort of get our basic shape blocked out here, and, really managing the size and shape of this. Start to smooth. You can kind of use the smooth as like a, yeah. And you can see how this is getting us a lot closer to what we would want in terms of a base mesh. Now, we did that first remesh at the very beginning of the process. And let's check in on the wireframe. And we see that it still looks, relatively evenly dense. But over here, especially where I started to really pull some things around in terms of the mouth, it may be getting distorted. And so what we want to avoid is stuff like this. So if, for instance, the draw brush is essential, the grab brush is useful, and that is here. And that allows you to grab and sort of pull on things. And so, for instance, here, maybe to start to form the mouth, that may be useful. But you want to be aware of situations like this where you're pulling it and you're starting to really, these polygons, these faces get much more stretched compared to those up there. You're still dealing with faces, and a single face can't be distorted. We just have many, many, many small faces. And if you start to get a very large difference in density between areas and the size of the faces, like this is much bigger than it is over here, then it is time to run the remesh again. And so you could just, if you want to make sure you're at the same density, you could just hit Control R again. And now you see it remeshed it again, and it remeshed the stretched area so that now that is not stretched. It has the same topological density, which will mean that the brushes work similar, right? And there we go. Now in sculpting, usually in this view here, but if we were to move around, yeah, I think I've been more aggressive of getting the mouse shape a little bit better in the blockout stage. And let's say that, hindsight's 2020. I want a little bit better. Right? So if we came in here and start moving some of this down, grab this and move some of it out. Turning up the strength on the grab brush is usually, I find, makes it a little bit more intuitive to use. And so, yeah, let's go. We want to go back to the blockout and cut out the mouth better. How could we go about doing that? I'm going to come back to the layout. Let's save this incremental. And now I'm going to grab this and Control C, Control V. And here's Night Remesh 1. And let's Boolean that mouth out. And so I'm going to make sure I'm in object mode, Shift A, cube, and scale that way down, tab into edit mode and scale that way down. Side, G, move this up, scale it down, and turn on some see-throughness. G, and let's see here. This top, G, G. There, and then, yeah, it's looking better. Make sure it's overlapping, and so let's look at it from this way. Is it going the other way? No. So let's grab all the points and scale on the Y, SY. There we go. And then let's cut that out, right? So let's make sure we have the bool tools installed. And just invert that or something strange. Did I? I don't think I did. That was a little bit strange. SY. There we go. That looks clean. Okay. And so now I want to subtract this from this and Control numpad minus. It got to be in object mode. So select this and this, Control numpad minus. Do I have bool tool installed here? So many installations. Let's look. Nope. That's why that didn't work. Okay. So now here from here, control numpad minus. There we go. And cutting a hole here. Manifold. We should be able to very cleanly do that. Okay. It needs to be in exact mode. That's better. Okay. And so now over here, I would convert to mesh. And I have a better cutout for that. So sort of a update to my blockout rather than wrangling a bunch of brushes. That's going to give me a much easier starting point back to here, back to sculpt, and I can go from here. Right. And so now, for instance, on this, some of this could get cleaned up with the shift here. And remember, when you're, especially when you're zoomed in like this, that first level of remesh may be not doing it for you. And so let's go back to R, look where we're at, and we may need to incrementally step it down to start adding detail, right? So don't push it like that, but a little bit more kind of there. Remember that just sets it, and then Control R actually does it. And you may see a little bit of faceting there, but now there's enough polygonal density that you'll see the behavior of the sculpt brush is probably more to your liking. And now you can start to go in and do things like perhaps setting up some of the nostril, maybe using the grab brush here. Remember, I still have the symmetry on to really get these things where you would want them. Here, here. Start to really pull the shape kind of where you would want. Here, I'm really looking at the alignment of the brush. And so here I want to pull this out much sharper. And so I need to bring the brush way down. And then it's too small. So here, let's do a different approach there. So actually adding some more topology, the snake hook here actually can draw things out a little bit better. And so that you just got to be careful. It does do this twisting thing, but it does in some instances do a better job of sort of drawing this out to maybe what you would want to get more of the shape. Start to figuring out where the eyes may be. Let's go back to the grab brush. F, F. Okay, that's helping a little bit. It's in. Figuring out this shape. Yep, that's looking more horse-like. We got this kind of doubled up. And so some instance like this, it may be worth it to come in and turn off the symmetry for a second and make some of the adjustments here. So maybe I together, maybe smooth it out a little bit first. And then pull it out again. There we go. Try and get that. Want. Let's go back to the draw here. I'm going to control, or click to get that a little bit sharper. Click here, smooth. Again, we're getting that pretty, just using the smooth brush here. There we go. And yeah. Okay, that's coming along. Let's go back one, right? The reason this shows up is because I clicked that in the reference image. There's that only show an orthographic view. There we go. Let's try and get the main roughly laid out here. So again, we probably don't need the symmetry on for that. But if we look here, it's not great, which I'm going to be symmetrical on the Y. It's not very smoothed out yet. Let's go into the proper smooth brush. Strength just doesn't seem to be doing the job here. So the density affects the smooth brush. So when there's more density, once you up the density of the whole thing, you'll find the smooth brush reacts a little bit slower, and so you may have to crank its strength a little bit there. And be sure to save along the way, especially before doing a remesh. Right, that can be a little bit dicey. You still have that on, still have this on here, like here, right? And start to thin out perhaps this part of it to give it more of that horse snout shape. Figuring out where the eye is going to be. And going into F. Oops. I pressed R there. Locked out. Now turning off this and start to figure out this part. And so here we really want to pull this out and we want it to be fairly sharp. And so I'm going to go to this crease sharp and let's look at it from right about here. It needs to come out and down. So let's do that. And that one goes in by default. And so going out, I think we're going to make it a little bit bigger. We want this hardness to be a little bit less. There's a bunch of settings here. That looks like. We're definitely pulling a bunch there. This is the crease sharp. I'm just going to go back to the draw. I think like the feel of that a little bit better. And let's look at it in orthographic view. Sort of build up the main area. Let's see if we get that feature about where we want it. Better. Sort of build it up. Let's look at it. There we go. Needs a little bit more here. And so now we're definitely getting, it's kind of like a new feature here, and it's definitely stretching some of the existing topology. And so we definitely want to run another remesh and check in. And this view, you can see that that's all much more stretched there. And so Control R, make sure you set the settings first. Right about there. Control R. There we go. So that helps. And now I can come in here probably with the grab brush. Now that there's enough to do, I can come in and sort of shape this a little bit more to what I would want. And trying to maybe one of those instances where a second window would help quite a bit. And so I'm going to tear this off like so. And over here, I can look at this in created view and be able to see what's happening over here when I make changes over here, right? And so if I make this bigger, sort of smoothing some things out here. Especially. Draw. Okay, that's coming along. The next part I would be working on here is that we want to, be smoothing all over. So let's grab here. Sort of cleaning some of this up and making sure that we have enough topology here to start to deal with some of the details. Yeah, so being able to see how everything works here. So here, smoothing this out to get this main a little bit more of a consistent shape. And then we're losing some of the main detail here. And here's where another brush really works, crease polish. And so the crease polish is really nice. once you have the shape smoothed out there, you can sort of then redefine the crease by just sort of tracing along it. And so it really helps to um, sort of make that boundary there in the main sharp. And also, this would be a good one perhaps once you come in with the crease sharp here. So the crease sharp, that's really strong. Let's turn that back down. For making some of the, it's still super strong. The crease polish just really strikes me as very like forgiving. It's just easier to make these sort of subtle changes. So it's like those indents in the main that are happening, kind of like so, right, throughout this whole area. It should be happening on both sides. They would be happening on both sides had I turned on the symmetricalness. Yeah, so I like the crease polish brush a lot. Especially when it comes to defining details later on, right? So here with the eye, for instance, coming in and starting to get the shape of the eye a little bit more like we would want. You know, there's that other layer around the eye. That could be a little bit of work here with the draw brush first, and perhaps much smaller. And so now F. And then using the crease polish on that F can help to, oops, not the crease, there it is. It's kind of doing a little bit of smoothing plus a little bit of sharpening at the same time. And the size of the brush really helps the level of detail you can sort of put in here. All right, so I'm just going about this quickly, but you can see where I'm going with a lot of this here and thinking about where I want which pieces of detail. And yeah, there's a good way to, it's a little bit, I think, more useful. So we can sort of see how that's lining up. And we can see some of the detail. Can we make the transparent more transparent? That's not there. Is it over here? X-ray, yeah. There we go. So now we can see a little bit more of where some of the details are and start putting some of this in up here, you know, around the teeth. Again, we're in this mode, and so starting to figure out where this line is going to be. In this case, holding down Control on the crease polish to sort of figure out where this upper lip is going to be situated. Really paying attention to that. Coming in here, and then starting to use some of that to define where these teeth are. The smoothing brush seems to be just demolishing what you're doing, coming back out, the automatic shift one, coming back out to the regular smoothing brush, and that way you can specifically dial in its strength a little bit easier to start to do those kind of things. And then in here, like, we need a much more defined detail. Yeah. And this is turning into something. So we got that lip forming. Can start to deal with some of this and some of the nostril there, and start to put these details in. And yeah, starting to really try to figure out how the shape of this is going to work. I think we need more flattening right here in order to get the actual shape of the nostril happening. And that's going to be a long way to getting that. And perhaps some grab brush. But I would finish this up. Be sure to be saving. And then making a new mesh and starting the retopology process. And so again, the same kind of thing. We're going to want it to be half. And so you're going to want a edge loop here, an edge loop here, and then form one like we did around the mouth. We'll do it for the eye, and then for the mouth here, and then start the process of connecting these so that we have these edge loops going this way, and then edge loops going this way. But I would trace the eye, trace the mouth with the quads, have an edge loop base, edge loop here, and then another one, perhaps right about here. And then just like we did with the bishop, go through the process of connecting those while trying to keep our quad topology, and then stop. So you'll have your sculpted mesh, and then you'll have your, which is going to be your high poly, and then you'll have your low poly retopo mesh. All right. Let me get this one up so everyone can check it out.